Have you ever wondered what really happens when the curtain of this life falls? Not in the way religion tries to convince us, nor in the cold silence that science sometimes leaves us with, but in that quiet, private space where your soul whispers the question no one can answer for you. What if death is not the end but another beginning? Alan Watts once said that life and death are not opposites, but two sides of the same coin spinning in eternity. And perhaps if we learn to watch that coin without fear, we might begin to understand what it truly means to live. There is a strange peace in contemplating death, though most of us spend our lives running from it. We hide behind schedules, plans, and noise, as if the constant motion could keep the inevitable at bay. Yet Watts often reminded us that the fear of death is at its root the fear of letting go, the same fear that prevents us from fully embracing life. To die, he said, is to surrender completely to what is. And in that surrender, something profound occurs. The boundary between you and the universe dissolves. What remains is not the end of you, but the return of what you truly are. Imagine for a moment that you are standing at the shore of the ocean. Each wave that reaches the sand is a life, unique, beautiful, and temporary. But the water from which the wave rises never truly disappears. It returns to the sea, merges back with the vastness from which it came. Watts believed that death is like that. The wave remembering it was never separate from the sea. We call it the end, only because we have mistaken the form for the essence, the ripple for the water itself. If we dared to see life through this lens, perhaps our grief would soften and our fear would fade. Death then would not be a thief, but a teacher, one that invites us to see the sacredness in every moment we are given. The tragedy is not that we die, but that we spend so much of our lives asleep, waiting to start living until tomorrow. Watts used to laugh at this human paradox. We plan, we hurry, we accumulate, as if eternity were a bank account waiting for us at the end. But eternity, he said, is not something we enter after death. It is the dimension we are already in, if only we had the eyes to see it. This is why, to truly understand death, we must first learn to die before we die. To release our attachment to control, to outcomes, to the illusion that we are a fixed self separate from the flow of everything else. Watts often compared the self to a whirlpool in a river, a pattern that appears distinct, yet is made entirely of the same water as the river itself. The moment the whirlpool disappears, the river does not mourn. It continues its dance, reshaping itself endlessly. Could it be that what we call me is nothing more than this temporary swirl of consciousness, destined to rejoin the current that birthed it? And perhaps this is the quiet revolution that comes with facing our mortality, realizing that life was never something happening to us, it was happening as us. Every breath, every joy, every pain was the universe expressing itself through this temporary window of experience we call a person. Death then is not a closing but a widening. The small self dissolves so that the greater self, the one that is inseparable from everything, can remember its true nature. As Watts once said, we do not come into this world, we come out of it, like leaves from a tree. To fear death is to fear the falling of the leaf, forgetting that its essence remains alive in the roots, the soil, the cycle that never ends. So when you hear the words life after death, perhaps it is not about continuing as a ghostly version of yourself somewhere else. Perhaps it is about realizing that life itself has never stopped and never will. You were never a visitor here. You were the universe visiting itself through human eyes, and when those eyes close for the last time, what returns is not you disappearing, but you awakening to what you have always been. When we strip away the myths and metaphors, what remains is a question older than humanity itself. What is it that actually dies? Watts would often pause before answering that, letting the silence do half the teaching. You cannot die, he said once, because what you are is the process, not the product. In other words, what ends is the shape, not the essence. The body is the pattern the cosmos has been drawing for a while, and death is simply the hand lifting from the canvas, ready to begin again elsewhere. The brush, the paint, the artist, all remain. Only the picture changes. It's hard for the mind to accept this, because the mind is built to cling to names, to faces, to stories. We say, I am this person, in this time, with this life. But Watts often laughed gently at our seriousness. He said, "We suffer from an optical illusion of consciousness. We think we are separate observers watching life happen, when in truth we are the very movement of life observing itself. Death only frightens the illusion. It cannot touch what is real. The real has never been born, and so it can never die. Like the ocean pretending to be a wave, it simply plays for a while and then returns to stillness. To see death this way is to awaken to a much greater intimacy with existence. Suddenly the sky above and the breath within are not two things. They are the same pulse expressing itself in different forms. Watts would describe this as the dance of energy, where life and death, creation and dissolution are inseparable steps in the same rhythm. Every exhalation is a tiny rehearsal for death, and yet we do not fear it. We breathe out, trusting instinctively that the next inhalation will come. What if death is simply the great exhale of consciousness, followed by an inhale so vast that our small sense of self cannot comprehend it? That realization changes how we live. If you knew that what you truly are cannot be lost, would you still hurry through your days, measuring success in things that crumble? Watts urged us to live as if death were a friend, not a deadline. The art of living, he said, is neither careless, drifting on the one hand, nor fearful, clinging on the other. It consists in being sensitive to each moment, in considering it sacred. When death is no longer an enemy, every second becomes luminous. Washing the dishes, watching the rain, holding someone's hand, each becomes an act of eternity made visible. But to reach this peace, we must pass through a doorway most avoid, the direct contemplation of impermanence. Watts didn't suggest escaping it through belief, but entering it through awareness. He would ask, what happens when you stop resisting the inevitable? When you really sit with that question, without running, without hoping, it begins to transform you. The fear that once seemed so solid starts to melt. You see that every loss, every ending you've ever endured, was preparing you for this deeper surrender. Death is not against life. It is the force that keeps it real, keeps it precious. Without death, life would be unbearable monotony. With it, everything becomes urgent, tender, alive. Imagine again the wave and the ocean. The wave, knowing it will soon break, begins to shimmer with new light. Every crest, every reflection becomes holy. That's what happens when we truly face our mortality. We begin to live in full color. Watts called this the awakening of the heart. We realize that love was never about possession, but about presence. The ones we lose do not vanish. They return to the ocean, and every time the tide touches our feet, they are there, smiling through the rhythm of eternity. The separation was only ever apparent. And so the forbidden truth, if there is one, is not about ghosts or heavens, but about realization. The secret that Watts tried to share, softly and playfully, is that there was never a line between life and death to begin with. The universe does not go anywhere when you die. It simply continues to dream, now through another form, another heartbeat, another dawn. And somewhere beyond all fear, you, whatever that truly means, remain part of that endless dream. Death is not the enemy. Forgetting who you are is. There is something profoundly humbling in realizing that the same energy that gives life to the stars is the one that breathes through us. Watts often said, "You are an aperture through which the universe is looking at and exploring itself." If that is true, then death cannot be the closing of a door, but the widening of that aperture beyond the boundaries of individuality. The question isn't what happens after death, but what happens when the observer and the observed become one again. That realization turns fear into curiosity and sorrow into reverence. Because if consciousness itself is the fabric of existence, then every death is merely consciousness changing its costume, preparing for another act in the grand play of being. But this idea is not meant to comfort us with fantasies. Watts was not interested in escapism. He wanted to bring us face to face with the immediacy of the present moment. He often pointed out that the afterlife we long for is, in a sense, already happening. If you are incapable of living in the now, he said, you won't be capable of living anywhere else. What we call heaven or nirvana are not destinations, but states of awareness available here and now. Death doesn't transport us to a different reality. It only reveals the one we have been in all along. The tragedy is not dying, it's never having lived while we were alive. To truly understand this, imagine sitting by a fire at night. The flame flickers, its shape constantly changing, yet its essence, the light and warmth it radiates, remains the same. Each human life is a flame, brief and beautiful. Death is simply the moment when that flame returns to the invisible source from which all fire comes. Watts urged us to stop clinging to the smoke and instead learn to see the light itself. Because in truth, nothing is lost. The same energy that once smiled through your eyes will shine again elsewhere, perhaps as the laughter of a child, the whisper of the wind, or the birth of a star. The universe never wastes a single spark. Still, this realization is not always comforting. The mind, with its attachments and identities, resists such vastness. It wants continuity, story, permanence. Watts never denied that pain. He acknowledged the grief that comes with love, the ache that follows loss. But he would remind us that even this ache is sacred. It proves we have touched something real. To love deeply is to accept impermanence as the price of beauty. He compared it to music. We don't listen to a symphony hoping it will never end. We listen precisely because we know it will. The ending gives meaning to every note that came before. Life, he said, is the same kind of art, meant to be experienced, not clutched. When we truly allow this understanding to settle, something remarkable begins to happen. Our relationship with time changes. We stop treating each moment as a stepping stone to somewhere else. We begin to inhabit it fully, as if it were eternity disguised as now. Watts believed that to live without resistance is the highest form of wisdom. That doesn't mean indifference, it means intimacy with what is. To live this way is to see that the divine is not waiting for us after death. It is breathing with us, right here, in this heartbeat. And every moment we recognize it, the line between this world and the next dissolves a little more. It's strange, isn't it? How we fear the unknown, when the unknown is the very source of all creation. Every birth, every inspiration, every act of love arises from it. Death, then, is not an interruption of life. It's the continuation of that same mystery in another key. Watts compared it to falling asleep and waking up. When you sleep, the world disappears, and yet you awaken in another dream, another perspective. Who's to say that death isn't the same rhythm on a larger scale? The cosmos dreams us for a while, then lets us dissolve back into itself only to dream again. The dream never ends. Only the dreamer changes shape. And so perhaps the true forbidden interview with Alan Watts is not a lost recording or secret message. It is the silent conversation happening within us right now. Each of us carries that same awareness he spoke of, that same capacity to see beyond the veil. The invitation is simple but not easy, to die to our illusions before the body does. To let the small self fall away so that the infinite can breathe freely through us. When that happens, death loses its power. It becomes, in Watts' words, like taking off a tight shoe, a release into something vast, familiar, and unimaginably alive. If we could see through the eyes of eternity, even for a moment, perhaps all our fears would dissolve into awe. Alan Watts often said that the greatest illusion of human existence is that we are travelers moving through time toward an ending. In truth, we are time itself, flowing, unfolding, endlessly transforming. Life is not a journey with a destination. It is a song without a final note, a dance whose beauty lies in motion. Death, then, is not silence after the music. It is the stillness that allows the melody to exist at all. The spaces between the notes are what make the song beautiful. And so, when we grieve, we are not mourning loss, we are honoring rhythm. In the quiet understanding of this, something shifts inside us. We begin to realize that the purpose of life was never to avoid death, but to learn how to love within its shadow. To be alive is to be temporary, and that is what gives everything its sacredness. Watts would say that when we truly accept death, we become capable of living without fear, because the very thing we feared becomes our teacher. He invited us to see death as the great advisor, reminding us that every goodbye is a chance to wake up. When we remember that we too will vanish, we stop postponing the beauty of existence. We listen more deeply, love more honestly, and forgive more freely. We become real. That is why Watts often described enlightenment not as an escape from the world, but as falling in love with it. To be enlightened, he said, is simply to be intimate with reality. And reality includes death. To look at a flower and know it will soon wilt, yet still call it beautiful, that is wisdom. The same truth applies to our lives. We don't need eternity to make life meaningful. We only need awareness. Eternity is not endless time, it is timeless presence. Every second you live fully is infinite. The mystery of the afterlife, then, is not a secret locked behind the grave. It is whispering in every moment of stillness, in every breath that returns to silence. If death is the return, then life is the remembering. Each of us is the universe awakening for a while, pretending to be separate so it can rediscover itself in 1,000 different forms. The reason the question of what happens after we die haunts us so deeply is because, at some level, we already know the answer. We've come from that silence before, and we will return to it again. Watts used to describe death as waking up from the dream of being you. And when you wake, you realize that the dream was never a mistake. It was a masterpiece, perfectly crafted for your growth, your love, your awakening. The soul, like a traveler between worlds, collects wisdom from each lifetime until it remembers the whole. So maybe the most important thing is not to seek proof of life after death, but to experience life before death with eyes open. To live as if you've already died, meaning to live without clinging, without resistance, without waiting. That is the secret at the heart of Watts' philosophy. When you no longer need the future to complete you, when you are no longer afraid of losing what you have, you become free. In that freedom, death itself becomes sacred. It is the final brushstroke on the painting of your existence. And like all great art, its power lies not in its permanence, but in its impermanence. And so when your time comes, as it comes for us all, remember the ocean. Remember that you are not leaving the world. You are returning to what you've always been. You are not falling into darkness. You are dissolving into light, too vast for the eyes to see. You are not disappearing. You are becoming everything. Watts would say that dying is like taking off a mask you've worn for so long that you forgot your true face. And in that instant of release, there is not fear but laughter. The laughter of the universe recognizing itself again. So, if there is one message to carry from this reflection, let it be this. You were never meant to conquer death, only to understand it. To see it not as an enemy, but as a doorway back into the infinite, the same infinite that, right now, is breathing as you. And perhaps that is why, at the end of all his talks, Watts would pause, smile, and say, "You are the universe experiencing itself for a while, and that is all right. That is enough." May this understanding not remain as words, but as peace within you. A peace that reminds you that you are part of something eternal and that nothing true is ever lost. If this message touched you, share your reflection below, not as a comment but as a continuation of this great conversation of souls. And if you wish to keep walking with us through these sacred questions, join this space again. Together, we can keep remembering the light behind all things,